Hello everybody, welcome to our next session today, which is called The Oceans and Us, Much to Learn, Much to Do or Not. So my name is Seb Hennige, I'm a reader at the University of Edinburgh and I'm the moderator for the session today. Excuse me. So we have a number of exciting speakers today, and before we move on to that, I'd just like to set a little bit of context for the session today. So we live on a blue planet, over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. And we're living in a time of unprecedented change. So with the environmental changes that we're currently experiencing, we've even changed the chemistry of the sea itself. And the changes that we're experiencing are faster than at any point in history. We also interact with our oceans in a number of different ways. We extract materials, we're looking for new resources to make new drugs and pharmaceuticals from. And of course, also fish and food security is a very important part of the way in which we interact with the ocean. So we are bringing a lot of stresses to the ocean. The oceans are experiencing unprecedented change, but of course, we want to have a future where we can sustainably continue to use our oceans. Now, to do this, there are, of course, a number of challenges that face us, but also a number of opportunities and ways in which we can start to address a future sustainable interaction with our ocean. And so today we're going to hear from a few of our panel members about the careers which they're in, about how they got there as well, and the kind of ways in which we can interact with our oceans as well. So our speakers today include Lasse Gustavsson, Steffen Knodt, and Bill Collins. And I'd like to start by opening the floor to Lasse.
Thank you, Sebastian, and greetings to all of you, wherever you are in the time zones. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. I'm joining you from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, also known as Vancouver in Canada. When I was a teenager, I told my mom, maybe I was 14, 15, I can't remember exactly, I'm going to be an environmentalist for the rest of my life. And she started crying. And she said, who's going to pay your bills? 40 years later, 5 organizations in 8 countries later, here I am, the president and the CEO of OceanWise, a conservation group with global ambitions. So Seb gave us a little bit of a backdrop, but I want to drill a little bit deeper on why do we need the ocean? Maybe you live in the prairies, maybe you live in a landlocked country, maybe you don't like fish. You still need the ocean. Why? The ocean generates more than half of all the oxygen you breathe. All of us, every second breath. It absorbs 25% of all the carbon that we emit and captures 90% of the excess heat. So the oceans is important for the climate and for our oxygen. 3 billion people, almost every second person on the planet, is depending on ocean for their main source of protein, fish and seafood. And the economy, the ocean economy, I don't want to call it the blue economy because of some of the ocean economy isn't blue, it's brown and black and dark and filthy, but it's a huge piece of the world economy. It's $3 to $6 trillion per year. So that's why we need the oceans. Just a handful of examples. I could go on, but I'm not going to do that. I'm also going to say, why does the ocean need us? Why do we need to care about the ocean? Well, we've been fishing for 40,000 years. The last 40 years, we've been overfishing. And that means that nearly 80% of the world's fishes are already fished to the max or even overfished. So we're taking more fish out of the ocean than the different fish stocks can replenish. Or they might even be in a state of collapse. 90% of the large predatory fish, the sharks, the tuna, the marlin, the swordfish are gone already. So if we want to eat fish, we want to bring fish stocks back, we need to do stuff. I'm happy to answer questions later about what we need to do because it's actually not that difficult. Kelp or seaweed, and I know Bill will talk about more of kelp, I'm not going to elaborate too much, but it's a really, really important ecosystem and a habitat important for fish, important for seal, important for otters. We've lost somewhere between 40 and 60% of the world's seaweed kelp forests, and we continue to lose kelp at the rate of about 2% a year. So from a biodiversity point of view, we have things to do. We need to do things to protect and restore the ocean. Pollution in the Arctic. We inhale the equivalent of a credit card of microfiber plastics every week, all of us. 26 billion pounds of plastic, which is who knows how much 26 billion pounds is? The equivalent of 100,000 blue whales. 100,000 blue whales. That's the biggest living animal on the planet. It leaks into the ocean every week. No, sorry, every year. So this is the depressing part of the story, but there's reason to be hopeful. The last couple of years, say the last 18 months, the world's government's been stepping up big time. There's been a lot of progress in international negotiations. And I'm going to give you 5 examples, because one doesn't really convince you that the governments are on track. But last year, the United Nations Environment Assembly negotiated a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. The Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the international convention to protect nature, agreed to a target called 30 by 30, which means 30% of nature will be protected by 2030. The United Nations Ocean Conference set aside $1 billion to protect 30% of the world's ocean. The High Seas Treaty, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, it's an international agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of marine resources. It's been negotiated for over 20 years, and pens are put to the paper as we speak. Last check this morning, there's 62 governments around the world who says, this is important, we're going to turn this into national legislation, and we're going to contribute to legislation on the international level. And finally, deep sea mining, and this is the resource conference. So deep sea mining, I'm sure, is maybe a discussion topic, but it's being put to a halt by the International Seabed Authority, which means there's a pressure on. We'll see what happens after that, but I think that's a good precautionary approach. That doesn't mean that I need to say that we will never drill in the ocean floor, but right now we don't know enough. So these are all very important agreements between governments, but I don't want to be part of politician bashing, but reality is that there's never been an international agreement on the environment that's been delivered on time. That has never happened. It's been going on for 40, 50 years, and they've always missed their targets time-wise. Most of the time, they also miss the substantial targets. And that's where we come in, ocean-wise. And that's where you come in as young, aspiring environmentalists, because only when we put pressure on our decision makers, and only when we support the decision makers who are trying to do the right things, it can happen. If you're a politician, you are dependent on a constituency that supports you if you're trying to do the right thing. And as a citizen, we are depending on holding back those forces who have the wrong intentions, who want to overfish, who want to overexploit, who want to pollute. So this is also where OceanWise comes in. OceanWise is a small startup conservation group. We're about 150 people. Most of us are in Canada, but we also have staff in the US and in Chile, in South America. We are fighting climate change, and we are restoring biodiversity, very much hands-on. You don't see us at the international negotiations, but you see us cleaning beaches, you see us planting and restoring kelp, you see us helping restore fish because we have a seafood label where you can navigate on the market, etc. We're also 50% of what we do is educating and empowering young people, people under 30, here in Canada from coast to coast to coast, but online also. And this year alone, we've had participants from 90 countries. Why are we doing this? Because conservation without action is just conversation. And we've been talking, and we're done talking. And there's some of us who's been doing this. I've been doing this for 40 years. I don't want to go to another conference. I want to go to another site and do something practical, because protecting and restoring oceans is not a conversation. It's practical, physical activities to improve the state of the ocean. And we will need millions of people like me and like you who are doing small things, practical action on a day-to-day basis. I know most of you won't turn your life upside down, but you need to do small things, because we need millions of people to do small, meaningful, practical things to protect and restore the ocean. So that's why we are OceanWise, and that's why we need you to join us. Thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Happy, of course, to answer any questions you might have, but Sebastian, back to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for starting us off, and a lot of food for thought there. And I take this opportunity to ask the audience members and the viewers today, so please put your questions in the chat box and we'll come back with all the questions at the end, and we'll ask everybody on their take on those things. Also, if you have any specific questions, just please put those in the chat box as well. So that was great. Thank you very much, Lasse. And I'd like to move on to Stefan next, please.
Yes, and also greetings to everyone on the line around the world. I'm calling in from Germany, from Aachen. Also myself, I'm an engineer by profession and never would have imagined that I end up in the ocean with my own ocean impact agency called Deep Blue Earth, and taking care about startups, investments, and blue economy. And that is basically led by, let's say, my career through quite a number of large corporates who are active in the field of offshore oil and gas drilling, deep sea mining, international shipping, and others. And all those corporates has a need also to become more sustainable, to reinvent their businesses, and of course, then also trying to work with startups. And there comes things together that, of course, then you working in that domain and recognize that in the ocean, there's a lot of potential for business, but also we do not know enough about the ocean for many cases. So I'm also serving in the United Nations Ocean Decade and also working quite a lot on ocean data. And that is why also ocean is relevant for all of us, like Lasse mentioned. Not just it's important for food or trade and others. The majority of the global population is living nearby the seacoast in mega cities. Everything we do about climate, CO2 emissions, temperature increase in the atmosphere goes directly to the oceans, and of course affecting severely our lives just by rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and others. That is really important. And so that drives also a bit for my career, that there's a strong need to know more about the ocean, and that in particular the international waters of the ocean is one of the areas where the nations need to agree how to deal with that area, what is important for all of us. As Lasse mentioned, negotiations can take decades until something is going on, but we need to have action now. Simply, the situation in the ocean is not in a good shape. Just if you think about ocean acidification and increase of temperature, the status of our coral reefs is not good, it's a high risk on biodiversity in the oceans going on if we don't take action on that. And that comes back a bit to what also my starting point of the career. I started in mining, in steel making, and others. So everything we can do on land is linked to the ocean. There's no business that is not connected somehow to the ocean. And if we don't take care about the ocean and don't understand better the complexity and how things are connected, it will be quite difficult to change things. And so that's something where I'm also working with Seaweed and others, and looking forward with Bill in the conversation. So how could we also help those areas in the oceans, like the marine protected areas that are coming up, to to regenerate the oceans and to make them better in ocean health and biodiversity and fish stocks and so forth. So that's a bit my background. Looking forward for the questions and what we can take here. And maybe one remark here, and that's maybe reflecting also the importance of the international negotiations. Until the COP26 in Glasgow, the oceans were not even being considered in the climate negotiations. So that reflects very well that many people and also young people do not actually know why the ocean is important in all the international relationships. Since 2 years at COP, the ocean is reflected. Before that, 25 COPs, no ocean was even on the table. And that needs to change, and that's where we are all working together here with Lasse and with Bill, and looking forward with the young people to amplify our work. That's
super. Thank you very much, Stefan. And I think you illustrated quite nicely the the need to work across different sectors and across, with industry and with different organizations there as well. So thank you very much for that. And we'll come back to a few points around that later. So on to our next speaker, Bill, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, folks. Hi, I'm Bill Collins. Bonjour. I'm speaking today from Southern Vancouver Island as part of the Wasanich First Nations. And I want to say thanks, and I'm honored to be here and to work with folks on the ground here that have an undying passion for the ocean, because they've lived on the ocean many years. Their forefathers and foremothers and their lineage comes from the ocean. So it's a very, very, very respectful place to be. And I hope I can do justice to the legacy that our first peoples have brought to the oceans. My seaweed story started about 5 years ago, almost to the day, with a rhetorical question to a local seaweed expert that's basically said, "What? You can cultivate seaweed?" I had no idea 5 years ago, and today we have a very strong going concern. We're one of the largest cultivators of seaweed in the ocean in North America. My personal journey started as a very young geologist, a marine geologist specifically, when as a forward party to some science that was happening in the Labrador Sea. We were with the Navy, part of a Navy entourage going north to protect Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic. We were also scientists and engineers as part of the military party, civies, and as a forward party member, my job was to prepare the submersible for operating in deep, cold oceans. And so my job was to help design some artifacts and mechanical devices for the manipulator arm on a submersible. We were collecting sediment samples to understand sediment stability in the Labrador Sea. And we were still a good 8-10 hours away from our first destination when I got rousted out of my bunk at about 2 in the morning. And the skipper said, "There's a problem with our deployment. It looks like we're the only vessel going to be on this deployment. And so you have a choice. You could go a day and a half back to port, pick up the party chiefs, the senior scientists, and go and do the diving that you had intended to do, or the ship can be yours at 0800 for your first dive, and we can get 4 days of solid diving in, 2 dives a day." I took about 30 seconds to make the decision, because the opportunity to investigate the deep ocean is very, very, very rare. And so I led that expedition for 4 days, 8 dives to about 1 kilometer deep. And subsequently, I was fortunate enough to run 3 other expeditions using excellent technologies, tried, tested, and true technology for deep ocean submergence. What that taught me was that if you're prepared to take some risks and you do things correctly, you can achieve things that you would have never believed you can achieve. So I think that's really the important story here. So fast forward 40 years from about then, and the seaweed journey, what we have an opportunity to start putting things right. At Cascadia Seaweed, our goal is to be a model company for the 22nd century. Don't forget, infants that are born tonight, at least in the North American context, they're going to see the turn of the next century. It's not that far away. We talk about 2050 with some environmental goals, or even 2030 as being something that's off in the distance. It's not. It's certainly not in seaweed years, because I think it goes faster than dog years, actually. What we have tried to do is build a team that is relatively fearless, because being an entrepreneur, starting with a zero slate, is extremely challenging and fearful. But we cannot wait. Normally, you would take a business such as this. You'd say, okay, we have a 20-year runway, and here's how you would build it in 5-year chunks, and you would measure it in 5-year chunks, and you would see progress. That's not going to work for us, because if we don't start to transition to products that are capable of sustaining the planet, and I'm not even talking, sustaining is really past term. It's now regenerative. We have no choice but to regenerate the ocean. Seaweed can be a part of the conversation. It's not the entire conversation. Fossil fuels reduction and energy transition is the only thing that's going to turn the tides here. But when we're talking about biospheric carbon, there are things that we can do to mitigate the impacts. And my colleagues here, both young and old at Cascadia, our goal is to prove that we can do it, to prove that we can be profitable and do it, to prove that we can work with coastal peoples who are a part of the value chain. They're not somebody that you're forced to work with because of regulation or happenstance or geography. These folks know what they're doing on the ocean, and we need to leverage the wisdom that's there, turn that into a business that we can be the model for the 22nd century and be that the proverbial triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, and make it work. So that's the goal in front of us. The oceans is a great place to start. And I'm just so happy to be here and honored to be here with my panelists to talk about maybe some specific aspects of what we do to encourage change in our attitudes and our goals.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Bill. And it's great to hear about some of your experience working with the various different communities around you as well. So thank you very much for that. So we've had a few questions coming in. So I'll start with some of the specific questions coming in, and then I'd like to come back to some of the wider scale questions that we've been doing as well. So first of all, well, it's not even a small question. So it was a question spurred by Lasse's comments about what can we do? And the question is indeed like, well, actually, if we want to take action, what can we do? You talked about OceanWise and about the good work which you're doing, but for everybody else in the audience that's maybe not aware of their local organizations that does the kind of work that you do, what should we do?
So thank you. That's probably the most important questions today if you think we're going to save and protect and restore the ocean by taking action. So what can you do? Your lifestyle, and I'm not putting the blame on individuals, but you have a choice on how you live your daily life. And there's really three things that matters. What do you eat? Most of us would be a better contributor to planetary health if we reduce the amount of meat we eat and replace it with beans and lentils and the odd fish every now and then. Don't need to go vegan, but reduce your meat consumption. Look at what you're eating and what kind of ecological footprint your food has. If you buy fish, which there's some good fish out there, follow the recommendations from either from OceanWise if you're in Canada or the US, or other seafood labels like Sea Choice or MSC. We're all trying our best to help you buy the better fish. How do you travel in your daily life? How do you get to school? How do you get to work? I've decided together with my family to live close to where we work. So we live downtown Vancouver and I walk to my office 35 minutes every day. A lot of my colleagues coming by bike. If they live further away, they come by public transport. The odd colleague here is living in a space where public transport isn't available and it's too far to cycle. So they do come with a car. And if you come with a car, what kind of car do you have? Do you need a big truck? Can you have an electric? Can you have somebody that's a car that is not needing a lot of gas? And then if you own your building, your home, how do you heat and cool it? If you're in a market where you can buy green energy, that's what you're going to do. So that's more on the lifestyle side. Now, if you can give me 2 more minutes, Seb, I can talk about activism as well. No, so if you live in Canada, join the 1 million Canadians who's cleaning up beaches. We've been cleaning up beaches for 30 years. I can guarantee you there is a beach cleanup near where you live. We've done 2,000 cleanups in this year alone. If you don't live in Canada, find another organization who's cleaning the beaches, because cleaning the beaches is really important because you get a clean beach, obviously. But also you can collect the data. What do you find on the beach and where does it come from? And we produce a document every year that's called the Dirty Dozen, the 12 most important things that we find on beaches. Cigarette butts, food wrappers, coffee cups. Where you live, I don't know where you live, but maybe there's something different. But having a clear understanding where the garbage comes from is important. And then you can join the group, whether that's somebody who's cleaning up the beaches, somebody's trying to do something else. Join a group because we're always better together. Other people is your best support if you want to do something difficult. And then the last thing, and I'll stop then, support the right leaders. And I'm not telling you how to vote. I don't know how to vote. I can't even vote in Canada because I'm not a Canadian, but make sure that if there are politicians or corporate leaders or religious leaders who's trying to do something good, lend your support, make them know. And finally, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your family, and see if they can do something small as well. You don't need to be a revolutionary, turn your life upside down, but you need to do some small things, and you need to talk to other people so they can do some small things too.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lasse. Some really nice words of advice there on how we can make a difference with small things, and we can start with small things, and it can all grow from there. And I'd like to ask a similar question to our other two panel members as well. So we all have our different thoughts about what we can do. So we've heard from Lasse there about very much on the front line of things, what we can do, joining the different groups. But Steffen, I'd like to come to you, please, and just your thoughts on what can we do going forward.
Yeah, so if you're talking about the ocean, we always talk about water. So what also Lasse mentioned, think about the use of water or how you can handle water in a better way, how pollution goes into the water, like microplastic and others. At the end of the day, it's all around a circle, and that is also helping you, of course, if you're in organizations or in business or in corporates. Think about your water consumption and how you can improve there. It's equally important, like the energy consumption in many other ways. And of course, then if you're talking about take a career path, be it as an engineer or a scientist or others, you can do a lot, and you will find ways where you can also work in areas where you are coming closer to the oceans, be it in production engineering, where I come from, but also if you're going to oceaneering or marine technology, there's a huge potential there. And even if you're going to some of the growth areas here in Germany, we have a strong need for offshore wind, renewable energy, and decarbonize the industry. That's a huge factor where you directly have an impact on the ocean, and you can also help the transformation of the industry.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steffen. Bill, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say the primary number one is to participate in the conversation. And by mere fact that you're listening to us today tells me that, yeah, you're interested in participating. Second thing is the global context is so diverse. In Canada, we are quite diverse, but globally, we are very, very diverse. So we may not all believe that our voice has an ear, but it does. And so participation is number one. And also perhaps a little bit of fearlessness. In order to make strides, we have to stick our neck out. As a society, we are now forced to stick our neck out, proverbial necks, collective necks, and become a little bit uncomfortable with change. Because clearly, if we don't change, we will be heading to what I read yesterday or the day before was a 3-degree change. So a little bit of fearlessness, be uncomfortable with the choices that you're making, as Lasse pointed out, and participate. That would be my thoughts. And I'll share a small anecdote. I was in my community, which is a small, and we live in Sydney here, maybe a population of 12 to 15,000 in a larger sort of greater Victoria framework. And I was listening to young folks particularly, complaining that our environment is going into the toilet, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And I felt, as we all know, it's a well-documented phenomenon, climate angst by young people. And I feel responsible for my children and their climate angst. So we decided to create something here called the Sydney Summit, which was basically trying to improve the life of our planet and our coastal ecosystems and our terrestrial ecosystems, one backyard at a time. So we gathered together. It took about a year to get the people to show up. They showed up en masse, about 350 people, and everybody, we asked for their public commitment to change, even if it's a small amount. And it was overwhelming. But one of the most interesting comments, we had conversation cafes as part of that. We went to old folks' home, and Sydney is known as the home of the newlyweds and the nearly deads. We went to rest homes and we talked to old people, and I was expecting old people to say, yep, we made this mistake in the way we didn't know, and therefore we're going to be disappointed because this place will be left in a position that's worse than when we came into this world. I heard something different. What I heard from the voices of the old people was that they are so thrilled that the next generations understand some of the challenges, and they had utmost confidence that while they may have been part of the problem, the next generations will be part of the solution, and awareness was so vital. So they were actually upbeat on the future. And I took that away saying, holy mackerel, there you go. Some of our ingrained thoughts about climate angst, there are things that we can do, and we should be doing it through participation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bill. And so plenty of food for thought there, and we'll circle back to that a little bit later, but I'd like to go to some of the specific questions we've got as well, so that I don't end up losing those. So Bill, actually another one for you at the moment. Can you share how seaweed cultivation benefits local ecosystems and how Cascadia is using the biomass?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There has been a lot of science, both generic, global scale science and small scale science, to point to the value of seaweed as part of a coastal and marine ecosystem. There's no doubt seaweed is an important element. In fact, it's about 3 billion years old, give or take, as an algae, and it's about 850 million years older than terrestrial plants. So biodiversity in seaweed is tremendous. As a foundational element of an ecosystem, it's really important that we are science-led, moving forward to cultivate seaweed, to use it as a part of a larger picture of coastal rejuvenation or coastal revitalization, not just seaweed, but seaweed as a foundational element. So the science points to significant improvements in local ecosystems because of seaweed specifically. We know we've had seaweed farms instrumented for 2 years. We're seeing millions of fish in and around seaweed farms. We believe it does improve the health of coastal ecosystems. But what about if you could leverage that by harvesting seaweed and then using it to offset some of the bigger challenges that we have? At Cascadia, we're going to make biostimulants from the seaweeds that we harvest. As a biostimulant, when you feed the soil will feed the plant. So it's no longer just throwing a lot of fertilizer at the soil, depleting the soil, but driving crop yields higher. We can do important work by using this beautifully diverse product to support healthy, resilient food systems, reduce the stress of drought, and particularly reduce the amount of chemical fertilizers used, which has a significantly negative impact on the soil. And we need soil to be, the soil is absolutely critical if we're going to eat. So those are a couple of answers to your question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bill. And so I have another specific question. And so one of the issues that we're facing around the world is, of course, supply of fresh water, availability of fresh water for many people. So we have a lot of desalination plants are being built. And so the question was about, are there any negative effects of the brine which is generated as part of the desalination and going into the marine environment? Are there any negative impacts? But I think this can also be broadened out as well. We're starting to interact with our marine environments in a lot of different ways. And desalination is the example used here, but if there's no response on that, how do we make sure, or how are we assessing what impacts our coastal activities are having to the marine environment? So do any of you have any thoughts on that?
Maybe if I can add something here to desalination plants. If there are certain regions in the world where there are negative effects on desalination plants simply because they change the salinity of in the ocean, what can also lead to toxic algae blooms. So then it's in a similar way we for example see it in the Baltic Sea, where I'm linked to, where we have influx of nutrients and phosphor in the ocean, and then there's also growth of algae. Also, the change of the salinity can also lead to algae that has not been there before. So that really is an issue we need to take care of, and to get a better understanding why these algae blooms can come together. And that is also, as Bill mentioned, a bit the challenge we have at the moment to get a better understanding of the ocean. If you simply see how little data points we have from the ocean, and where the white spots still are in understanding the complexity and the interrelation, that's something we need to work on urgently to improve our models, to get a better understanding of the ocean. If you work in ocean research, they're trying to get up digital twins of the ocean, what is really a massive task. So that is for a lot of people out there where they're working on to improve the understanding of the ocean and to improve the multiple stress factor, the understanding of the multiple stressing factors of the ocean.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steffen. Lasse.
I have a few comments on this one. I'm going to use the controversial topic of deep sea mining as an illustration, because deep sea mining now is driven by generally by electrification. And electrification is a really good strategy to transition away from coal and oil and fossil gas. So if we find a way to mine rare minerals and electrify faster, we will have less mining in total, because we will need less coal, less oil, less fossil gas than we do today. So the question is, how can we do this in a sustainable manner? Is it in the ocean seafloor? Is it in the Congo basin? So rare metals are not, is it in the Scandinavian, northern parts of Scandinavia? Where do we find those rare metals? And what's the smartest way, the least damaging way to mine those? That, of course, needs to be taken into the context of the primary purpose is to get us off fossil energy because of climate change. But there is no way to do that without having some impact. I believe, without being an expert, that if we can find a way to electrify, the negative impact from mining, which all mining has a negative impact on the environment, then the total negative impact of mining will be less. But that's speculation. So what you need to do in a situation like this is to have very thorough environmental impact assessments. And I know I live in I'm privileged in the sense I live in a democratic country with plenty of money and lots of resources. This may not be the strategy everywhere, but without having this approach of having very serious, independent environmental impact assessments that are reviewed not by the companies themselves, not executed by the companies themselves, but by somebody who doesn't have a vested economic interest in the outcomes of the studies, I think that's a really important contribution to how do we develop a blue economy? How do we get off our dependence on coal and oil and fossil gas?
That's great. Thank you very much, Lasse. And I see, Bill, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to jump in on this as well?
Thanks. I've got to pose a question here to my fellow panelists. Because the question has come up in seaweed farming quite often. Tell me about the negative impacts of seaweed farming. And my comment is, well, it's very difficult to prove a negative. So maybe you start small, you go science forward, obviously you have the measurement techniques, but you start by going small and putting a seaweed farm in the water and measuring the impact. Because I fear the decisions that we're forced to make in a risk-adverse globe now, because we're all very nervous about new technologies, and rightly so, trying to set the scene for growth of good things for the planet will always be challenged by questions we're asking ourselves. What are the negative impacts, and how do you start a theory where you're trying to prove a negative?
Yeah, I think that's it. Well, I think that's a very nice question posed there, Bill. And yes, I think actually starting small and building up from there, I think is a key way to do that. And myself, I'll kind of jump in here. I do a lot of experimental work as well. So I investigate the impact of climate change on marine organisms. And yes, we're looking at it from multiple angles. So looking at it from in situ, doing small scale experiments, doing large scale experiments. There are multiple ways to come into it. So I think it's, these are the good kind of questions to be thinking. How can we prove, or how can we look at the negative effects? So starting small, and it takes a long time. And I think one of the challenges that we face is that with all of our activities, quite often we may not see the impacts, positive or negative, for several years. And that's something which we have to bear in mind. And funding is always a key challenge as part of that to monitor these impacts and effects as well. And getting money for monitoring is not always the easiest sell. But that's a different section. We can come back to that maybe in discussion later. But for now, I'd like to move on. And we've all come to our present day careers from, we've been in our present day careers, we've had our career path to get to where we are. However, we've talked about how quickly things are changing and the opportunities which are coming as well. I'd like to ask you all now that if you were to start now, and where we are now with rapidly changing oceans, but more career opportunities than when we all started out with our careers, would you take the same path, or would you maybe take a different path as well? I'd like to start with Lasse, please.
That's a hard one, Sebastian. For me, it was never a career choice. I didn't choose to be an environmentalist. It wasn't a career choice. The first 20 years of my career, I was volunteering. I was working in bars and a substitute teacher and all sorts of stuff to pay my bills. You remember my mother was worried about paying my bills. So was I for the first 20 years. And I didn't really get a proper paid environmental job until I was in my mid-30s. My youngest son, he's obviously significantly younger than me. He's a marine biologist. When he told his granny, my mom is going to be a biologist, she said, "Oh, that's a great career choice." So something has happened in the 40 years, and that's a good thing. When I was growing up, environmentalists, we were the oddballs on the schoolyard. Now it's kind of cool to be an environmentalist, and that's a good thing. And you can make contributions to the environment many different ways. You can be a lawyer, you can be a banker, you can be an engineer, you can be a biologist, you can be a librarian. If I would start over again, I'd probably be a lawyer, and I would hold corporations and other environmental people who are operating environmental destructive companies and hold them accountable in court. That doesn't work everywhere, but there's a very interesting development in law at the moment where young people take governments to court, where environmental groups take corporates to court for ignoring their responsibilities and avoiding legislation. And I do believe that the court system has a really important role, especially in democratic countries, to drive values and behaviors. And once we have environmental law as an effective field, I think we will see a lot of progress, because I believe most people and most corporations will follow the law most of the time. So getting the right laws in place and then having them enforced, I think is a good strategy.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think you have a point well made about how important the legal side and the law side of it is. Thank you. Steffen.
Yeah, so for myself, reflecting a bit my career, I think I again would start as an engineer. I would never have imagined how much things you can do as an engineer in different fields, from seasport to space, manufacturing. So being an engineer is a great thing. However, one thing I would do different is working in innovation, realizing that changing or transformation large corporates is a very challenging field. So if you're in an organization that is not acting like you would like to have it, or you'd like to transform and you would really like to do things, being brave and being bold, and also start your new business and working with startups or smaller companies with like-minded people and then doing things, simply that is a great opportunity these days also to start in new fields where simply the large organizations will not change. And that is a great opportunity for young people. If you have a passion for a certain area and would like to have impact in certain fields, consider that, and it will be a good career path for you as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. And same question for Bill, please.
Yeah, thanks. I think your career pays the bills, but your vocation and your passion should drive you from the heart. So I tell folks today, it doesn't really matter what you do. You have to do the best that you can at what you do. You may have 5 careers, you may have 10. It's really difficult to predict. The information age provides us with so much opportunities, but also so much angst about what careers we should be choosing, and you never know. So I would say follow your passion and your heart. So to drive your vocation, but also to keep in mind that you have to pay the bills, and as Lasse's mother pointed out, and if you can marry the two, you're really lucky. It may take you some years to find where you can marry the two. That should be your goal.
That's a good aspiration for all of us there, Bill. Thank you very much for that.
You're still young, Sebastian. You're still young. You can make it.
Well, thank you. So I'd like to move on to something which a theme which we've come across within the chats that we've had so far. We've gone from working with local communities all the way to industry and somewhere in between as well. So Bill, I'd like to start with you again here. So actually working with local communities and using some of that knowledge and integrating that into your work, what do you find particularly exciting around this? Or what is it that really kind of drives you to do more of this?
Working with local communities, particularly Indigenous communities, as we have here on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia, what I found most important was to listen with 2 ears, to try and not prejudge, but to really listen. And with that, what I discovered was a world that I didn't even know existed because of my own myopathy. So I think when you listen, that will help guide and use the wisdom of folks that are around you. I recall reading lots of Arctic exploration biopics when I was a youngster, biographies. And one of the key elements that drove people to disaster was because they didn't listen when they showed up in a place and they were exploring. They just stopped, and they might have heard, but they didn't really listen. So I think that's the benefit when you work with coastal peoples in general. If you listen and you take your time and you hear what they're saying, I think ultimately it will open your mind. And that's what's made me most excited about working in the seaweed business, because the fundamental component of seaweed is creation of new biomass. And that creation of new biomass is not going to be done in a factory. It's going to be done in the ocean. And so working with folks that have lived and worked on the ocean for millennia has been really important. So that's my message in working with local communities is listen with 2 ears, because you have 2 and you may as well use them.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bill. And I'd like to go to maybe the other end of the spectrum now as well. So Steffen, you work a lot with industry and you work with many partners on the land side as well. So what are some of the opportunities? So Bill was saying we need to listen with both ears, but what's the language that we can use, and what can drive positive interactions with working with industries that maybe they're not necessarily on the front line of working with the ocean?
Well, I did a study recently with the finance sector, and one finding we had, of course, that we don't speak the same language. So if you would like to make people aware of the ocean and also investments, you need to get out of your bubble and also transfer what is part of their business or the experience into their domain, and then things become better. And that's a bit, of course, where we need to improve our working also to find the right access to the people, because if you're in the shipping industry or in offshore energy, then of course you have your partners, you know their business, but a lot they do not. And even if you think about how many different types of vessels are out there for people not in the ocean industries, it's a surprise how many different ship types you have around. But I really would like to come back also to Bill and what you mentioned with local communities also working on that, because if the local communities are really important for change and for implementing what we are also developing in this area. So if the local communities are not supporting what we are doing and not getting a better understanding on the ocean, then we will not be successful. We have also projects in Africa and other areas where it's very important that you already work with schools, that you educate them. It sometimes even starts with that they are not able to swim. So bringing them closer to the ocean, educating them, the young people, and getting them closer to why the ocean matters to them is really a very important part of our work with the local communities, and where also the large corporates needs to work with the local partners on site and not from the headquarters somewhere else.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stefan. And Lasse, I think you work all the way across the spectrum there. And so Stefan was just talking about the challenges of communication, making sure that we speak the same language. So what are your thoughts around that? Oh, sorry, Lasse, you're on mute.
I think language is really important. I don't think we will ever speak the same language. I'm married to somebody who's got a different language than I. We will never speak the same language when we burn our fingers, or I still swear in Swedish, but I've been living in English for 30 years. I still swear in Swedish, but that doesn't mean you couldn't try. And I think it's important to building on what both Stefan and Bill is saying around local communities. Local communities, of course, fundamental, because if it isn't local, it actually isn't conservation. Because every practical intervention is in a space, in a place. Having said that, though, there's now so many global problems, and so many of the problems that we're facing on the local level is driven by global trends or global intervention. So you can't just work on the local level. You also need to see how can what we do in this particular part of the world scale to other places. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing as OceanWise, because we do really cool stuff together with our partners. And our Seaweed programs are all led by indigenous partners, by the way. And that's really important. But it doesn't matter if we do all the things right here in Western Canada or in Los Lagos in Chile. If the temperature in the ocean is increasing, our seaweed will die. Doesn't matter how strong we are locally. So you need to find the connection to the global as well. And I think there's a very interesting dynamic between governments and corporations that we're not paying enough attention to. And one of the things you'll be surprised to hear from a hardcore environmentalist, we need much more market economy and much less government intervention. And when I'm talking about government intervention, I'm talking about subsidies. Here in Canada, we give subsidies, government subsidies, tax reliefs, etc., to the fossil energy market 15 to 18 times more than we subsidize renewable energy. So if we just say, take off this, so this is theoretical, of course, stop giving subsidies, let the market rule. Oil and gas and tar sands would just not, they wouldn't happen in the same scale as they do because it would be too expensive. And overfishing wouldn't happen because the subsidies into building ships and buying fuel would not happen either. So I would really underline the importance of fair competition on the industry level. And our politicians in every country, is spending much more money on protecting what we already have and not driving change fast enough. Canada is one of 5 countries, and because I live in Canada, Canada is one of 5 countries who are going to invest 50% of all investments in fossil energy in the next 10, 15, 20 years. We don't need to. If our politicians were putting the money where their mouths are, our transition would be much faster. We have to stop subsidize the things that we say that we don't want, and we need to accelerate the transition. And if we need subsidies, let's subsidize the things that are hard to do because they're new, not because they're hard to do because they're old-fashioned.
Thank you very much, Lasse, and some very important take-home messages in there as well. So thank you very much for that. Now, we've got the last 5 minutes of our session here. So something which has come up in all the conversations we've had so far is just how important there have been some really important developments in the last few years and in the last 6 months as well. You know, we've got the High Seas Treaty, we've got various legal instruments which are now supporting us. They're really making us think, how can we engage sustainably for a good future together? So as we come to this message of hope, you know, there is certainly a message of hope. I'd just like to go around the panel quickly, just very quickly. What is your hope for the oceans for the future? Or what excites you, or what is your hope for the future? And we'll start with Bill.
My hope is that as a global community, we all become connected with the important elements of our ecosystem. We have one planet. The thought of going elsewhere and abusing this planet and then, oh, that's okay, we can go elsewhere. We don't know our planet well enough. We've barely scratched the surface, as was pointed out earlier. So my hope for the future is that we have innovators recapturing the passion for understanding the oceans and using that information. That is powerful. And when we use it in the right way, we can make big change. And you only have to look at something like the progression over the last 5 years of eDNA. So you can sample a water mass, even if it's a small amount of water, and you can tell if a fish had swum through that bit of water. I'm exaggerating slightly, but the fact is everything leaves a footprint. And by developing the technologies to understand that footprint, we can start to make the connections between the good things that we do for the ocean and the things that we do that are not good for the ocean.
Steffen, same question to you.
What makes me hopeful is that the ocean connects all of us. It's a life support system, what we need on Earth, and that this is also a big chance for us to collaborate on international level. So if you see all the treaties now being signed on BBNJ, it's really a milestone that nations come together and work together on something that matters for all of us, because the ocean doesn't care where it comes to shore. And that is important these days, even more than maybe in the past.
That's great. Thank you very much. Lasse, are you back with us? What are your...
Thank you. I had to log out for 10 seconds. That tech was not on my side, but I'm back. I am optimistic because more people care. There was a time when being an environmentalist was just strange. Now it seems like everybody cares. They may not call it environment, they may call it resource management, or they will call it something else, but the oceans and nature generally is on everybody's mind nowadays. And that's a good thing, because there's nothing wrong being a biologist, obviously. You know, we need biologists, but we need all other people too. And I think the most important thing for everybody who's participating in this conference today is just do something. And if you don't know what you want to do, we have a website. We got the best URL of everybody, ocean.org. And on that, we have a list of things that you can do. Maybe they don't fit perfectly if you live in Indonesia or you live in Peru, but you can get inspired. Do something, because it's only action that will change. Once you've done something, the next thing will come easier, and it will become easier again. It's only controversial to be an environmentalist in theory. In practice, everybody will love you when you do good things for the ocean or do good things for nature. So do something.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lasse. And just to wrap this up, I would just like to say it's been a pleasure hearing from you all. And I think we've heard some really important messages which have come through today. We've really seen that people and communication and engagement is central to actually moving forward and having, you know, a sustainable future with our oceans as well. I think we've shown that there are plenty of opportunities. There are challenges ahead, of course, but there are plenty of opportunities to get involved, and we can all make a difference. We can start small and build it up from there. So I think as we look forward, we do have a future which certainly has hope, and it's down to all of us and everybody that's listening on this call today to actually go out and, as was said, to actually be a doer, take those risks, be fearless, and actually go out and really start thinking, what can I do? And get involved however you can. And I'd like to say thank you very much for all of our guest panelists today. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. I think we've all had a nice discussion around that. And thank you very much for everybody joining us to listen to us all today and ask your interesting questions. And hopefully you will all go away with some more thoughts, more questions, and we're always more questions thrown out, but more questions thinking about what can we do and what is a future sustainable ocean to us. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of the conference.